Why does a debt-based system require inflation to survive? Jeff Booth says with deflationary productivity, the debt can be paid back. Otherwise, is there more to the story? Now, this takes us into a number of different rat holes, as they say. But first of all, it's quite simple. And some of this might sound very blunt and harsh, but it's the numbers. The problem is entitlements. Some people call it a welfare state built on debt. And there is no way to fix that right now, or probably ever, other than a great reset, which you've spoken about a lot. It's actually quite simple when you think about it. When you bring in 4.8 trillion of tax revenue and you spend over 6 trillion, your deficit is 1.x trillion every year. And how do you make that up? And then your debt of 31.5 trillion is growing every year because of these deficits. And the interest payments alone are exploding. In fact, the interest payments on this debt currently is nearly $750 billion. Now, politicians aren't going to cut spending or raise taxes to rebalance the budget. In fact, even if they raise taxes to 100% of everybody's income, they still wouldn't be able to dig their way out of this. There simply isn't enough revenue. And the only way out is to inflate. So let's look at a quick number here. If this was a stock, it would be a great stock to own. But this is the up and to the right federal interest payments of $737 billion in Q3 2022. Big number, ladies and gentlemen. And you can see, that's why I talk about the Fed shooting themselves in the foot, because the more they jack rates, the more they increase their debt servicing cost for their own debt. It's like you having a mortgage and saying, you know what? I'm not happy paying 2% on my mortgage. I want to pay 6%. And I want to make sure my family has no food to eat. That's what they're doing. That's why many people, top economists, top finance people, find it preposterous what they're doing, especially when you look at where we are with inflation. Now, let's talk about something else. The US has 172 trillion in unfunded liabilities. You've seen this slide before. 22 trillion that we owe in Social Security, 34 trillion we owe in Medicare, and a bunch more. And when you consider that only half the people in the US pay taxes, that means every taxpayer, every household owes $2.6 million. And the average lifetime earnings of a family is $2.7 million. So there you are. There's $100,000 to live on for your entire life, on average. And this is why we keep saying, anybody young today, any millennials, Gen Zs, you're being born into this huge amount of debt, and you need some type of escape hatch. And that is something like Bitcoin or some very fast appreciating asset. So let's get back to inflation. So let's say we want to get back to 0% inflation. In order to do that, you would need to raise the interest rate to at least the inflation rate, which is 8.6% officially. Take the 31 trillion in national debt, raise the interest rates to offset inflation would mean we would need to pay about 2.7 trillion in interest alone. That's 31.5 trillion multiplied by 8.6%. And to put this number into perspective, our current deficit is about 2 trillion. So we would need to double the entire budget deficit just to pay the interest. And you think that's crazy? Well, wait till you see the next slide. The Fed can raise interest rates by a few basis points here and there, but inflation is going to keep going up. In fact, the CPI inflation number you see isn't even real. It has the CPI inflation, true inflation has never been under 5% for the last 40 years. But they say it's always around 2%, which is just BS to begin with. And last time it was actually at that low back in the 80s. But today we've got this GDP, debt to GDP ratio of nearly 130%. And that's a problem. This is why the Fed is stuck way beyond the point of no return. In fact, this is a glimpse of the future. This is where we are. This is the ballooning interest costs, which threaten to crowd out important public investments. Just looking at this over the next bunch of years, nearly 40% of the government budget will be spent servicing debt. This is why there's going to be that big great reset button hit at some stage, because it's simply not sustainable and there's no way to escape it. but they are, secretly, a little bit of the way, just to alleviate the problem and elongate it and push it out, is inflating the way out of debt.